You know, it's almost impossible to overstate the importance of the original Tomb Raider. It was a landmark title during the early days of 3D gaming, established leading lady Lara Croft as one of the industry's biggest icons, and alongside Resident Evil, it was a key part of why the PlayStation was able to tap into an older audience and solidify its dominance during the fifth console generation. Not too shabby, considering some critics initially wrote it off as little more than a cheap Indiana Jones imitation. Yet the legacy of the original Tomb Raider hasn't really been celebrated. Many of Lara's peers have been dusted off, given a new coat of paint, and given a second life, but aside from some mobile ports which were released without much fanfare, Lara's original outing hasn't received a lot of love. Now, before the hardcore fans chew my ass out for seemingly forgetting about Anniversary, I'm aware of that game. In fact, I actually own it, and I think it's pretty great for what it was. But what it was an attempt to reimagine and modernize the first game to make it more palatable for a new audience, and that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is a faithful remaster that drags us all kicking and screaming back into the mid-90s. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you all that it's aged perfectly by modern standards, whereas you can look at Super Mario 64 and trace a clear line to see exactly how we got from that to Odyssey. When you compare Tomb Raider to something like Uncharted, or even its own modern sequels, it's pretty clear the evolution of the 3D action-adventure genre has diverged pretty heavily from what core design was doing back in the day. I mean, hell, the simple fact that the game was built around using the D-pad to navigate true 3D environments means the controls are going to feel foreign to anybody who's played a game within the last 20 years. I mean, when's the last time you played a title that had buttons dedicated to sidestepping? And that's without even mentioning the level design. Modern action-adventure games make sure that you always know exactly where you need to go. If there's not an ever-present waypoint guiding you along, then chances are it's going to funnel you forward in the right direction. Tomb Raider, however, abides by the where the fuck am I supposed to be going philosophy of level design that was prevalent throughout the 90s. Levels are filled with doors that are locked by keys and switches, and it's up to you to hunt them down. Hell, there are dead ends that don't even contain any items or secrets and seemingly exist just to throw the player off. You'd never see a developer waste the player's time this way today. And yet, it's these seemingly dated aspects that give Tomb Raider its charm, unable to pull off the type of silky smooth movement that Nintendo showcased with Mario 64. Core design instead focused on tight, white-knuckle, deliberate platforming that demanded precision. Lara isn't floaty and can't readjust in mid-air, so if you're a half step too early or too late timing your jump, then you'd soon be watching her take a nasty fall. While this difficulty does make it more frustrating, it also means that it's all the more satisfying when you eventually pull off a tricky section that's been giving you problems. And the lack of hand-holding is genuinely refreshing these days. It's an action-adventure game with an emphasis on adventure. Being forced to really pay attention to your surroundings makes perfect sense in a game called Tomb Raider. The player's acquired knowledge of these areas and their levels and their secrets ends up being the most valuable tool in their inventory. It might not be able to compete with modern games when it comes to set pieces or spectacle, but none of them can hold a candle to the original Tomb Raider when it comes to replicating the thrill of exploration and discovery. Now, while I'd love for them to stay true to the original gameplay, quirks and all, there are a couple of small changes I'd recommend. The most obvious one would be giving the player control of the camera. It would remove what I would consider to be Tomb Raider's biggest flaw, and doing so wouldn't have anything but a positive effect on the gameplay and help everything it does right shine through that much more. Now, the second change I would make would be to allow the player to select their difficulty. Now, the difficulties wouldn't actually change the gameplay, but they would change the save mechanics. The easiest one was swipe the save system from Tomb Raider 2, which allowed the player to save whenever they wanted. Normal would stay true to the original, with the one-time use save crystals spread throughout the levels, and Hard wouldn't allow you to save during the levels at all. It would be for the long-time fans looking for more of a challenge. And let's go ahead and throw in some better collectibles while we're at it. If you played the original, then you know that all the secrets you find in it are simply items such as ammo, health, or best of all, weapons. While the game kept track of how many secrets you found, it never actually gave you anything for finding all of them. So why not reward the player with unlockable costumes for tracking these things down? Lara literally has dozens, if not hundreds of outfits for a developer to draw inspiration from, and it'd be a great way to celebrate the history of the entire series. Obviously, the best way to top the whole project off would be to give Tomb Raider 2 and 3 the same treatment and package them all together like Activision did with Crash and Spyro. Neither is quite as strong as the first entry in my opinion, but given that all three titles place within the top 15 best-selling PS1 games of all time, there's definitely a lot of nostalgia out there to be tapped into. Plus, it'd make it hard to argue that you weren't getting your money's worth. Either way, I hope that Crystal Dynamics realizes the potential in truly taking Lara back to her roots. Millions of people fell in love with the first Tomb Raider, yet nearly 30 years later, there isn't anything else like it out there. And that's a damn shame.